So somebody made the suggestion, said don't let 3 people sit here because it blocks you. People won't be able to see.
Over there?
Directly in front of you.
On the web or in the audience?
Audience.
So take away the chairs.
Okay, I didn't know. I didn't want to take away because you know why? Because there's a
That's
woman
right.
who sits here.
You'll get some comedian who'll walk in and sit down and say it's for me.
If it blocks others, I would take it away. Take away 3 chairs. That's all. No, they want you not to be there.
Oh,
There's 3 chairs you want to take away.
I would say take these 3 so people have a clear view.
Is that the best I did?
I've heard people say it in the past, but somebody
So
came
be
up
it.
with
That's all.
specific.
No problem. Thank you. It's not personal.
Oh wait, so we're already going.
It's live? Yeah.
Hold on.
Or maybe you should block it before.
Turn it the other way. No, the book. Sit it.
Okay. Mazel tov.
Is there a way to stop it before it begins?
How do you like that?
All right, let's see. I can stop it.
Can you block like?
Here, I'll tell you what. Do it this way. Not personal. See, so sorry. What is this?
is it live? Like somebody can go on the web now?
I'm looking at it on the web.
And everything is fine?
Yeah.
Is it on the web too? Did she make an icon? Is there an icon? On the website, did she make an icon?
Yeah. Let's just see here. I can see you a little bit. I don't know. That's a good height.
Ready, set, go.
I don't know, maybe. They can see me. That's
Yeah.
funny. But the sound is on too already?
Yeah. That's because I moved this.
No, the whole thing is going to fall. It's not as solid. Why do you have the drinks here, by the way?
So people don't get distracted by this thing.
Oh.
I called your office.
You left a message?
Yeah, I spoke to the lady.
And today?
No, last week. About the book.
Oh, okay.
Did anybody get it?
I don't know. She takes care of it. If she calls her, she takes care of everything. It wasn't a message from me. If you don't mind, they want not to put the chair. No, tell her to sit over there. They don't want anyone sitting over here. If you don't mind, sit over. Sit over.
This is what's on the internet right now. There's a 15-second delay between what you say and what's there, so I'm going to lower this so it's not.
So I mean you pass your time on the web.
So where would somebody go if they want to?
What?
Where would somebody go?
If you go into the website, there's a link on the website. That's right. So you need to have that.
I'm going to make you sit over here so you don't do that.
He knows about it because he was here last. No? I think he doesn't know.
Whenever you want to decouple the pen.
I'll just wait till people come in. So, no? How many people are going to be coming here for the drinks? They can put drinks here.
So I just moved the water. Maybe we should take the computers anyway.
have to be with Shulchan.
Okay, I'm gonna do it. Okay, good evening, everyone.
Greetings.
Sure.
And good evening, and another ongoing saga Wednesday Night Live. And I also welcome the online crowd, and I wave to all of you, as I promised some of you that would be hooking in. I know that there are people listening to this class and watching it as far as New Zealand, where I believe it's 11 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, which is Thursday.
On what?
And all over the world. So I welcome everybody, those that are here, those that are all over the world, in cyberspace, whether on the moon or extraterrestrial life that may be hooking in onto this from outer space as well. You never know. So good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
And we are this week at the conclusion of several things. It's the conclusion of the month of the first Adar, in this leap year, the Hebrew leap year of that goes by the lunar months. And leap year, you add a 13th month, an extra month of Adar. So we're just coming to the conclusion of that Adar, which will be concluding tomorrow. Shabbos will be Rosh Chodesh of the second Adar, which will lead into the festive holiday of Purim. It's also the conclusion of the second book of Exodus. The second book of the Torah. We conclude this chapter, Pikudei, this week. And as every conclusion has a certain power to it, as will be in synagogues all around the world this Shabbos, they will announce after the final reading, the final section, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek, which means be strengthened, strengthened, and be strengthened. So it's called a Shabbos Chazak. There are 5 Shabbos throughout the year, for each one corresponding to each one of the 5 books. So the first one, the end of Genesis, this is the end of Exodus, the end of Leviticus, the end of Numbers, and the end of Deuteronomy, Devarim, is actually Simchas Torah. So it's the conclusion not just of another book, it's the conclusion of all 5 books. And that obviously is celebrated with Simchas Torah. So in some mini way, there's a little Simchas Torah when you conclude a book. But as it is with everything in Judaism, graduation doesn't mean you end something, it also means you begin something. Graduation of one level in order to achieve a higher level. So these conclusions are really not just conclusions, but also beginnings. These endings are also beginnings. And being that this chapter is called Pikudei, which literally means to count, so we titled this week's get-together. As you know, I don't like the word class. Class conjures up all kinds of images. Not everybody has good memories from their classroom years. Class also suggests classification. Many of us don't like to be classified and stereotyped. So instead of class, we'll call it a get-together. Like in last week's chapter, Vayakel, Moses gathered all the people together, from where we learn that we gathered together. In Hasidic terminology, it's called a fabringen, a get-together, a gathering. It's more of a communion. So this week, this get-together is connected to the chapter in the Torah that we read, Pikudei. As I said, thus we titled this week's get-together, Love is in the Details. Because the word Pikudei means to count. And what kind of counting are we discussing here? We're discussing the accountability that Moses offered after the conclusion and the building of the temple, in which Moses gathered gold, silver, copper, and 12, 13, 15 different types of materials that the Torah enumerates. So Moses, as he was an accountable human being, though he was a trusted person, felt the need to account for all that he had gathered. And he actually, at the Pikudei HaMishkan, he began to give an accounting. This is how much gold was gathered, this is how much silver, how much copper, how much materials. So the Jews knew that their donations and contributions were being used not for administrative costs and overhead, but entirely for the temple, as Moses spells out. But the word Pikudei itself means to count, and when you count, counting always suggests details. Because you can't give an accounting just of general terms, you have to break it down into specifics. That's what accountability means. To just say accountability in very general terms, it doesn't mean anything. Its significance is when we spell out, here's what I did this moment, here's what I did with this project, what I did with this money, with this resources, with the time, energy, and so on. The contrast of this detail called details is last week's chapter, the chapter called Vayakel. It means to gather together. So Vayakel, in contrast to Pikudei, suggests a group. You gather a group together. In a group, the individuals may be significant, but the focus and emphasis is on the group, on the entire group energy as opposed to individual energy. What makes it even more fascinating is that many years we actually read these two chapters together, last week's and this week's, and it becomes one long chapter called Vayakel Pikudei, and both chapters are combined. However, this year, as it is in certain years, particularly leap years, when you have extra months, some chapters are split into two, or actually these two chapters, which were two, are actually read in different weeks. So this has another message and lesson for us, as we'll see in a moment, in the sequence of things, as you'll see the idea of a group and individuals and how they play themselves out. If you may recall, last week I discussed, and I also wrote about it in my weekly column, the difference between the visionary and the builder. The disagreement, or the different opinions of how Moses and Bezalel, Moses was the man of God, prophet of God, who delivered the instructions from God how to build the temple, and Bezalel was the architect, or the builder, the contractor, who actually built it and put it into place. And the Talmud relates of a conflict or disagreement between them, that when Moses told Bezalel and the Jewish people build the temple, the order in which he told it was the way God told it to him in the chapter in Truma, which says, first the vessels, and then afterwards, after the vessels, he spoke about the temple itself, the structure. So Bezalel challenged Moses and said to Moses, this is not the way of the world. The way of the world is first you build a structure and then you place the furnishings inside it. If I go with the order you said, that first we build the furnishings and then we build the structure, what should I do with the furnishings as long as the structure is not there yet? To which Moses responded, your name Bezalel testifies to your brilliance, to your Bezalel means in the shadow of God. You must have been there when God commanded me, because it's true. What you're saying is true. That's what God intended, that you should first build the structure and then bring the furnishings inside. So the question is asked, if that's the case, so why did God tell Moses in the first place the other way around? So I discussed this last week at length, and as I said, I wrote about it, but I will repeat it because this episode comes up again in this week's chapter. In this week's chapter, you find in Rashi, right in the beginning of the Pikudei, Rashi says that it says that Bezalel built the temple exactly the way God told Moses. So Rashi, citing the Talmud that I just cited, asked the question, how does Bezalel know what God told Moses? It should have said Bezalel built the temple the way Moses told Bezalel. Exactly the way, precisely as Moses passed it on to Bezalel. Why does the verse say that Bezalel built the temple exactly the way God told it to Moses? And the answer is, the Talmud says, is due to this whole episode. Because Bezalel in some way felt and understood that what God told Moses was actually the other way around. That's what Rashi cites. But the question remains, so why did Moses state it, and why is it repeated in the Torah, where God says to Moses that first the furnishings, if that's not the way of the world? So in brief, the answer to that question is that there's a vision and there's implementation. The visionary is the one who sees the whole picture, and especially the end in mind. So even though there's a process and a procedure and a method how you get to that end, in any type of structure, you always begin with a vision. You can't begin with the details. You have to begin with the vision. And Moses understood that the ultimate purpose of the temple was not to build a structure. This wasn't about building another structure. It was about integration. It was about bringing the divine presence into our personal lives. And that is through the furnishings and through the vessels that were built in the temple. So Moses stated it from the perspective of the visionary as he heard it from God. The vision, the purpose, the ultimate goal, the mission of the temple is the vessels. So what he said first was the purpose of it all. Bezalel was the implementer. The implementer has to go with a different order. The way of the world is now you have to implement. Implementation, you can't begin with the end. You have to begin with the beginning. How do you implement something? So you go from the bottom up. First you put into place the structure. You finish the structure, then you bring the furnishings in. So they were both correct. It was just from different perspectives. So Bezalel did hear the perspective of God, but God's perspective in the implementation part. And Moses shared the perspective the way it is from the big picture. So the ultimate goal in life is integration of spirit and matter. But to reach that place, you always need to go through the means that usually take more time, and the process there is step by step by step. And as I wrote last week, and I discussed, the challenge to all of us in our lives is, do we get caught up in the means to the point where we forget the end? And without even hesitation, if I asked all of you here tonight, what is it that you did today? All of you will be able to say, I went to work, maybe you took off from work. You could say what activities. You went shopping, you went to a show, you read a book, you met a friend. Those will be easy things for you to answer without any hesitation. But if I asked you, so what did you do about the mission of your life today? There you have to start thinking. Because we are so consumed with the means of our lives, it takes effort for us to discover what our mission is, to even articulate it, to be conscious of it, which is somewhat sad. Because what should come first to you is, at any given moment in your life, why are you here? Most of us can't answer that question easily. But if someone asks you, what are you doing? That you can answer. So we become consumed, and we're involved with the details of our lives. Bezalel, we're building things. The question is, what are you building it toward? What is the end in mind? That's why Moses is such a vital component in the Torah, because people get consumed with their daily routines, the daily quotidian, as they say, the monotony of things, and we're so busy with so many details that we often forget why we're involved in these details in the first place. We may not even remember how we got into them. We know we have to pay our bills, so you need a job. You need a job, whether you like the job or not is another question. So circumstances usually control our lives. And this is the sad reality of the world in which we live. We live based on necessity. So we respond to the moment, the needs of the moment. If someone comes to you and suddenly has a complaint, you have to respond to that. If people are putting pressure on you, if there are expectations, if the ghosts of your mother and father come to haunt you because of their demands, and so on, all these things are the forces that control our lives. To have that type of inner peace where you know why you're here, and then you go accumulate all the resources you need to fulfill that mission, is not an easy thing to achieve in our lives. Especially at this stage where we're already in the rat race, on the merry-go-round, to just stop and say, okay, why am I here? Not that easy to do. Most of us, and I tested this, you ask people, mature adults, why are they here? Most of them start laughing. Most people start laughing. Last week I had a meeting with someone, and she was telling me how difficult it is to find a soulmate, a person who's quite successful at work. You've heard the situation. Anybody has that, this, or this was a unique case? Okay. So she was telling me how difficult she's having with relationships, and I saw that in the life she put together, well dressed, has a good job, financially is fine and secure. So she's not a person who one would call dysfunctional, like you can't hold a job or is just a loser in some way. On all so-called mundane levels, she seemed very much put together. So I asked her, just like that, I knew that it's going to elicit a chuckle. So I said, so why do you think you're here on this earth? So she laughed and she said, that's why I came to you. I said, so you're living all these years until you're waiting to come to me to answer such a little detail in your life? I mean, is that what's going on? And it was almost like the question was surprising to her, because it was not something you just ask every day. Like people don't ask that question. either because we don't have an answer, or because it's uncomfortable, or it's just the way of life. We're busy with the details, we're busy with the means, so we don't ask about the end. But if you really think about it logically, if you step back a moment, you live a whole life and you have no idea why you're doing it all. So of course there's the prerequisite answers. I'm making money, because when I have money I have power and control over my destiny, and with money I can buy anything. Okay, so if you have all the money that you need in the world, look at people who have it. Have they found their purpose in life? Show me somebody that in direct proportion to their wealth, they become focused into the purpose of life. One would argue the other way around. The more wealth one accumulates, the more you get consumed with the means even further. It's like marbe nechasim, marbe daige. The more you acquire, the more guards you need to protect it. The more insurance you need. Then you need insurance on the insurance, because the insurance may not be enough, etc., etc. Like Rabbeinu HaKadosh Rabbi Yehuda told the king, the Roman emperor, who was his friend, his colleague, and he said to him, there were people, there were anti-Semitic advisors that were always looking for ways to undermine the relationship. So they finally found an opportunity. The king, the emperor, was very kind and decided as a good gesture to send Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, a great gift. They sent him a gift of accumulated a lot of wealth, precious stones and pearls and diamonds. And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, when he received the gift, he sent back a mezuzah to Rabbi Yehuda, to the emperor. A mezuzah, a piece of parchment that is a source of protection. We put them on the doorposts. Some people had a mezuzah on their table when they studied. Some people even carried a mezuzah in a stick. So here they had the opportunity. They said to the king, look, you send him so much wealth, and what does he do? He insults you by sending you a little piece of parchment that's barely worth anything. So the emperor, thought they had a good point, so he summoned him, and he was upset. He says to him, look, what kind of friendship is this? I send you a lot of wealth, and look what you sent me. So he responded quickly, and he said, look, what you sent me is beautiful things, and I really appreciate it, but I have to now hire and rent and guards to protect all that wealth. It shouldn't be stolen. And I sent you something that will protect you and your wealth and your kingdom and everything in your home. So it's not always about the wealth. You have to realize what is the ultimate purpose of life. And bottom line is, therefore, that most of us are consumed with these details. This isn't a critique, this is just an observation and almost a sad side effect of life. Life and its burdens, the challenges of making ends meet, the responsibilities we have to pay our bills. We need shelter, we need food, we need clothing, we need many things that we don't really need but we think we need. And we live in a world with a lot of peer pressure and all kinds of other competition that constantly is demanding, putting all kinds of demands on us. And in such a world it's quite difficult to see through the fog and see the end in mind. That's why a Moses appears on the scene. God sends a Moses to be that light, the visionary, the one who can say that all this building and all this accumulating of wealth and all this constructing, there's a purpose for it all. And the purpose are to become a container for the divine, that we should all be channels for divine energy in this world. V'shachanti b'seicham, I shall rest among you. And as beautiful as the temple was and the structure, if it doesn't create a channel into your personal lives, it's not fulfilled its purpose. So Moses begins with the end in mind of vessels. And Betzalel, as an implementer as he was, did what he had to do. What did he do? He said, but how do we get there? There are steps. Now, without a Betzalel, obviously, we don't have the implementation. That's a necessary element. But without a Moshe, you don't have a purpose. And that's where this partnership worked perfectly, because each complemented the other. And together they built the Holy Temple that would become a model for all the temples afterwards in the Jerusalem, and above all the temples in our own personal lives today, which the ultimate goal is how to turn your material life into a life of meaning and purpose. So you have here, in a way, there's an expression in the Talmud, and we actually say it every morning in the prayers. We speak about different ways, the Yud Gimel Midas, Shater Nidreshes Behem, the 13 principles, methodologies by which one studies the methodology of understanding and studying Torah. So there's a concept called Klal, Prat, and Klal. So we'll do some new concept here, Klal, Prat, and Klal. In Hebrew, that's a translation in English, the Hebrew words for the following. Klal is a general formula, a general statement, you can say a all-encompassing rule. Prat is a detail, and klal is again an all-encompassing rule. In any healthy structure, in any healthy composition, every business plan, every building ever built, every music song ever composed, every book ever written, every outline and successful plan always consists of a klal, prat, and klal. You always begin with an executive summary. You have to have a general picture of the whole story that begins the story. Some way, a all-encompassing vision, a mission, a driving purpose. Then you get enmeshed into the details, where you flesh it all out into details and details upon details and categories and subcategories. Take a book. Even though when you begin reading the book you may not know its theme, but the author sure knows what it is. So even when he or she writes the first line, the first detail, the first character is introduced, the first episode takes place, first chapter, it's details in a picture that he's slowly building, that the reader at the end of the book will come to appreciate. The same thing is with music. So from the perspective of the composer or the author or the architect or the builder or the writer, what you have is that person has first a klal. They have to have a general picture that's really an all-encompassing picture. They may not always come to that easily. That may take time. Then comes the next step, which is communicating it effectively. Because you can have a very clear picture in your mind, but if you don't communicate effectively in an organized fashion, you'll confuse anyone you're trying to communicate with. So you take, let's say, a beautiful composition of music. It has a message, but if it's garbled, or if it's not played in the right order, it'll get very confusing and overwhelming. And then comes the klal at the end, where the picture is concluded, and then you see, the whole thing comes and merges. You feel the whole picture is there. So there's a concept we say in the Friday night prayer, Seif Maaseh b'machshava tchila. The end of the action arises in the beginning of the thought. That, as I said, the end in mind. An effective planning, an effective production, you always have to have from the beginning someone who knows what the end will be like. And then you need someone who carries it through those details and makes sure it's always aligned with the initial vision. And then comes the conclusion where it all comes together. So klal, prat, and klal. In the context of the temple, you have this, that Moses, of course, was the vision. And he said immediately, the vessels first, because that's the integration that I mentioned, the purpose of it all, the vision. But Tzalel then comes and builds it step by step. And what do you build first, as I discussed last week? First the makif, first the surrounding energy, and then the personal energy. When a teacher begins teaching a student the ABCs, as we discussed, so when you look at an ostensible level, you look ostensibly, as an outsider, you see the teacher is teaching. Why are you teaching the child ABC? What can the child do with ABC? Nothing, initially. And you have to painstakingly take a year or 2 years till the child masters the ABCs. But if you think about it, the ABC, for the teacher's perspective, is just a stepping stone to be able to learn to formulate words. And once you can formulate words, words turn into sentences and phrases. And then they turn into paragraphs, and then they turn into chapters. Essentially, all communication, all the conveying of ideas, all began with an ABC. So at the point where ABC, it's a detail. But from the teacher's perspective, this detail is the first step, because there's something precedes the detail, and that is that the way to communicate ideas is through letters and words. That's how we speak and how we think and we communicate and we write. And we transmit ideas and information. But ultimately, it has to go through stepping stones, ABCs, and then you learn how to compose a sentence and so on. And then the student one day comes to the point, well, once they have mastered it, they go back to the initial vision of the whole purpose of it all. And this is true in all our lives. If you really want to have a good understanding of yourself, you should try to dissect your life, your day, into these elements. What's a klal, what's a prat, and what's a klal? As I said, most of the things we do are usually on the prat level, on the detail level. That's how it is, on the detail level. And the klal part, which is the vision, whether it's the vision that precedes the details, or it's the vision that is concluded with it, that comes at the end of the details, is something that we have to work a lot more harder on. But I cannot say that there's nothing in our lives. When a person, for example, has a momentous event in their lives, they fall in love, marriage, having a child. God forbid, sometimes it's another side, a loss. There are magical moments in life where suddenly all the details make sense. In a sense where you come to suddenly realize, well, not necessarily all the details make sense, but you suddenly realize something deeper is going on than just the menial activities that you're involved in. So it's really vital to have a good understanding of your own life, where you stand. The context of when Bezalel and Moses built the temple, so Moses was there all the time, at all times, to be the reality check, to make sure things are aligned. Bezalel was involved in the details, but Moses kept checking. So you need to have two voices. We too need those two voices. One voice is the implementer involved in the details, and another voice is making sure it's aligned. But this all becomes a lot more fascinating when you think about it in the context of what I said earlier, the Vayakel Pikudei context. It's true that vision is vital because it is the big picture. It's what connects everything, connects the dots. But when you think about it, let's take a relationship as an example. There's a relationship between two people, love. Is the key here the vision that they share, the two people, or is the key the details? Because on one hand, you can say if there's no fundamental foundation that connects two people, beyond the details, there really is not going to be a very intense relationship, or definitely committed one. On the other hand, you do have the expression, love is in the details. You see people who love each other, it's not just on a level of platitudes and generalities. It does come down to specific details that people do for each other, sometimes very small details that don't seem to matter that much. So we have these two chapters, Vayakel and Pikudei, are like two stages, or two dimensions to a relationship, to all relationships. One is, the Vayakel is like the gathering stage, where it's more about seeing the big picture. And Pikudei, as I mentioned, is counting. And counting is specifics, details. To explain it even further, let's just take, for instance, not love between two equals like adults, let's talk about love from a parent to a child. What is more important for a child? The vision the parent carries for the child, or the detail, nurturing, that sometimes comes down to just being there for the child, feeding the child, validating the child, being there for the child in every small thing, even though things that are not necessarily life transformative and very dramatic. The beauty of a mother cradling a child, or a father, where there's no, as I said, no glamour going on. It has a certain power to it, even though it's not, we'll call it a visionary necessarily experience. So here's the question, and this is a question that's asked on many levels. The mystics ask it as well, that is God interested in the big picture of our lives, or also in our details? Or if people ask this question, does God care about what I do? So you can say, yeah, God cares about the big things, but does God care about the little things, like what you had for breakfast this morning? Or other souls speak means the things that are seemingly only minor, superficial details. And an interesting, fascinating conclusion is this, that there's an expression we say Yom Kippur in the prayer service. There's an expression that when we talk about God, you talk about Shava, Mashva, Katan Ugadol, that God is the all equalizer, which means equalizes the small and the large. Who decides what's small and what's large? That's the first question. Maybe small things are very big, and maybe big things are very small. One Hasidic Rebbe once said, well, actually, he was asked about the contribution of Hasidic thought, so he says it teaches a person how small the big things are and how big the small things are. Because you see, in our terms, if someone asks you what's an important thing, what's a big thing in life, many people have different answers for it. Some people think big, and we're not talking about whether size matters or not. We're talking about some people think big is powerful. What's power? Some would define power by the idea of sheer brute power. We call it what's the word I want to use? In armies, they call it firepower. The one with a stronger army, the one with physical brute strength, that's a more powerful and a stronger, bigger thing in this world. Small would be someone that's meek or weak or doesn't have that same power. So when we measure things, you have to know what context we measure things. So therefore, when we talk about it in that context, when we say that God is equalizer, it's coming to understand that there's something that is beyond small and big, and therefore, from that perspective, you cannot know what is big and what is small. And I say this in the context of our own personal lives, that the biggest things of all, this is what the Kabbalah teaches, Jewish mysticism, that the greatest dimensions of divine experience are experienced in some of the most smallest details, much greater than they experience in the highest spiritual realms. And I'm going to give an example. An example goes like this, that the Baal Shem Tov speaks about a verse in the book of Psalms. In the book of Psalms it says, Tfilah la'ani, God, King David says that when you stand before God, Tfilah la'ani, this is the prayer of the pauper. And he goes on to state his psalm. So the Baal Shem Tov asked the question, when you're standing before God, why are you standing like a pauper? You should be standing like a king, like a prosperous person, with pride. Pauper suggests a very lowly attitude. And he gives this analogy, this beautiful analogy. He says, two people were once invited to see the king. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. One of them was an educated aristocrat, very literate and appreciative of arts and culture. And the other was an ignorant, illiterate pauper, peasant. So first comes the educated aristocrat, and he enters the palace immediately so overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of the palace, of the collections of art on the walls, and the library that he sees, and the music. Being that he's a literate person, he appreciates all, a connoisseur, so he begins to take it all in and gets so absorbed, and he misses his appointment with the king. By the time he realizes his appointment, he missed it. Then comes the illiterate pauper, and because he doesn't appreciate any of this, is not distracted by it. So he walks right through all the chambers, into the king's inner chamber, and spends the whole audience with the king, and asks him for everything he needs, including the wisdom and the appreciation of all this beautiful etiquette. So the Baal Shem Tov says, when you stand before God, suspend your literacy, suspend all your achievements and all your great accomplishments, not as an advocating illiteracy, God forbid, but that when you're standing in the presence of something beyond it all, you want to be simple. You want to just say, I have certain needs, instead of being distracted by all the glamour and the glory of the divine. And this is explained in Kabbalistic mystical language, that some of us get so caught up with the beauty surrounding, that we forget the simplicity within. Which is one of the explanations given, and this is, people ask the question, does Judaism believe in astrology, in the stars? Or for that matter, palmistry, reading hands or faces, the palms, or crystal ball in general, and write about reincarnation and previous lives. So if you look in the Zohar and you study the Kabbalah, Kabbalah has much to say about all these things, including dream interpretation, and the stars, the zodiac, mazalas, and so on. And there are previous lives. And there's no doubt that there were mystics that were able to see, and were able to see within a soul many of its reincarnations. The Arizal was such a person, and he spelled it out to his students. So it's documented. Yet you find when you go to a true Kabbalist, with emphasis on true, you rarely will find one will share anything about that with you. I've seen a true Kabbalist, and I don't think I ever saw once any even inkling that he knew. He never let on that he knew. Which of course goes into the idiom of the biggest secret, the best kept secret. You may hear it here for the first time, and that is, those that know don't say, and those that say don't know, when it comes to true mystical secrets. Because you see, from a Jewish perspective, it's not about sensationalism, it's not about showing off, and definitely not about making money off of that, which is usually a good sign that there's something else going on. It's about truth. Do you need to know this information? That's the perspective of a true person of God. You read the Bible. Moses was a man of God. No one was as close to God as Moses. And you do not see Moses speaking this way. People sure came to him. It was all comes down to one word. It's called human, one word, responsibility. If it's important for you to know what your previous reincarnation was, you'll be told. If it's not important, it means you don't need to know to live your life. So to find out why you're so jumpy because you may have been a frog in a previous life, it may not be that important for you to know. And if it is important, as I said, you'll be notified by the right authorities. God will let you know. And this is a fundamental principle in Jewish thought. Tamim ti Hashem Elokecha. Be simple with simple approach. God will give you what you need to know in your lifetime. Often, why are we so intrigued with this exotica? Because exactly, it's exotic, sensational. It's hard to deal with life as it is. It has a certain, where we like sensations, or someone can come and tell you your future. So there's a certain reason we gravitate to things, and usually it's not because we become more responsible. It's usually either it can become a good excuse, or definitely a good distraction. If it makes you a more refined human being, and you become more responsible, by all means. But that's the condition. And it's usually not that way. I'm not here to criticize any of you if you're intrigued by it. I understand. I mean, all of us are intrigued by mysteries. And as one Rebbe once told a person and said, I'm having these dreams. Rebbe, can you interpret them for me? The Rebbe said, I'm not a dream interpreter. He says, but when the Torah it says Joseph was a dream interpreter, we see there's something about dream interpretation. So the Rebbe said to him, listen, I have enough difficulties figuring out what to do while I'm awake before I get to my dreams. So like people are not taking responsibility for what they're awake, they're trying to figure out what's going on in the dreams. And yes, Judaism has this pragmatic approach. At the same time, there's profound volumes that talk about dreams and talk about, as I said, the stars and other things. So what's going on here? The answer is, it comes down to what you're supposed to know at this point in your life. The true masters and true teachers will tell you what you need to know right now. They won't tell you things just to satisfy your curiosity. It comes down to responsibility. And can a person really take the truth? Would you really like to hear the whole naked truth about yourself? Is there any person on this earth that really can say yes to that? Many people are going to say quickly yes, but it's not that simple. Let me share with you a story about that. There was this man who was seeking the truth all his life. All his life. And he spent years going from one country to the next, from one master, from one guru. Everywhere he go, he was looking for the truth. What is reality? And he spent many years. Now he's reached his old age, and but he still continued. One day he meets a truly wise man and says to him, maybe you can tell me. I'm still looking for what is the secret of life. So the man looks at him and says, and how long have you been looking? He says, my whole life. And what kind of price have you paid for this? And he tells him, this was my priority. I gave up money, I gave up glory, power, covet, honor, all for this. So he says, you know what? I'll take you for your word, and I'll send you to a place where you can perhaps find the secret of truth. So he gives him directions to go to this distant land, in particular city, and outside of the city, a particular forest. I mean, to make a long story short, he embarks on the journey. If we had time, I could do an hour version of the story, but there's no real need to it. We'll get cut to the chase, to the klal, not to go through all the details of the story. So he comes to the destination, he looks, and he finally comes to this forest, and as the man had described, he sees a very large palace out of nowhere, in the middle of the forest, all lit up. He gets closer. As he's getting closer, he's getting more anticipating what he's going to find. He enters into this big room. It's a vast room. He never saw such a large room. As far down as he can look, he sees a long, long hall. And what fascinates him most, what strikes him most, is that there's only one thing in this room: candles. Thousands and thousands of flames are burning in rows upon rows and rows, all the way down, as far as he can see. And candles and flames of all shapes and forms. Some are large and like torches. Others are just about to burn out, in between. It's a fascinating scene. As he's mesmerized by this scene, suddenly, abruptly, he hears someone come over to him and says, "What are you doing here? How can I help you? I'm the caretaker of this house of light." So he tells him that I met this wise man. He sent me here. He said, "This is the place you can find the truth." He says, "Yes, this is called the house of truth, the house of light." And what are all these flames? He says, these flames, each flame is a reflection, a mirror image of another human being on this earth. Every person's story is in this room. So if you observe a flame, you can and find out who that person corresponds with. You look at the flame, its shape, its size, how strong it is, how weak it is. You'll see the whole story of that person's life. See, the big flames, the new flames that are just beginning to burn, these are new lives, children that were just born. The flames that are about to burn out are the people who are about to end their lives in this world. The flames themselves, you look at how their shapes, you'll see what kind of life they lived. Healthy lives, unhealthy lives, productive, whether they were selfish, whether they were selfless. So, of course, as he's hearing all of this, he says, very tentatively, he says, "So can you show me my flame? The house of truth." He says, "Of course." And he says, "You go down row 20, flame number 45, 7, and you'll find your flame." And he leaves him go. He leaves him on his own. He obviously slowly inches, doesn't know what he's going to find. And he was a person looking for the truth all his life. He gets over closer to the flame. As he gets closer, he's shocked to see that it's about to burn out. It's about to burn out, which means he's at the end of his line. So he looks around quickly, if anybody's watching. He gets so disturbed by it, he goes over to another flame where there's a lot of oil, and he pours it into his flame. Suddenly he sees the piercing eyes of the caretaker. And the caretaker says, "So you were ready to pay any price to find the truth, weren't you?" So this is a story told by older Hasidim for people who are looking for the truth. When it comes, we are ready to hear the truth until maybe it affects some of your own gain. Or it's a nice concept to look for the truth, and I'm not suggesting that we all don't want to find some truth. But to see the full naked truth of your reality is not just a simple matter. That's why we have a thing called denial. And we have all kinds of voices and defenses mechanisms in our own systems that somewhat couch, we don't always want to see it all. It's you see many businesses fail, many other failures that people don't really want to look face to face at their own mistakes. That's on a basic level. On a fundamental level, there are many things about us. And I'm not talking about necessarily whether you are a self-loathing person and have a low self-esteem, and therefore you don't want to find out the truth because you know how terrible it is. Even people who have a high self-esteem and have self-confidence, the truth is not a simple matter. The truth has consequences, above all. You see something that's true, there's going to be consequences. That means then you have to live up to what you've seen. This is why you find in the Torah many stories about the 4 sages, for instance, that went into the garden. The Dalet shenichnasu lepardes. And one went mad, one died, one became an apostate, and only Rabbi Akiva was able to enter and exit b'shalom. Nichnas b'shalom, v'yotze b'shalom. Because when you see truths, especially divine naked truths about reality, about yourself, about others, things change. There was a Hasidic Rebbe who had lost a large family in the Holocaust. And there was a so-called atheist who was once one of his Hasidim. And he came to see the Rebbe after many years. He still had the connection. And he said to the Rebbe, "You know why God did it. So why would you, how do you reconcile that?" So he says, "No, I don't know. And I'll tell you something even more, I don't want to know." If God came to me and said, I want to tell you why the Holocaust happened, I would say, I don't want to hear. Because it's not just a simple matter to go into that realm. Who wants to hear a justification for the Holocaust, even if there is one? You don't want to go there. When Moses saw the burning bush, it says that he covered his eyes. There's certain truths you don't want to see. Truthful people don't want to see the entire truth of everything, because there are profound consequences of that. And when you have that maturity, you'll understand that. Now, if none of you get what I'm saying, so be it, but think about it. And because many people may think in a very cocky way, in a very gung-ho way, yeah, I'll take on the truth. Not that simple, I have to say. So going back to our discussion here, to simplicity and the details, the Baal Shem Tov's analogy is that there are many glamorous things in this existence in which we live. The stars and the celestial bodies have a lot of power. But Judaism always focuses on God Himself. We don't worship the stars. Though Judaism does not deny that the stars may have power, but they will always say these are the fingers of God. And don't get caught up in the stations and forget about the destination. The stations of life have many beauties, but they can be distractions. Sometimes, as they say, the tzad shekeneged, the sitra achra, the negative, the dark sides of life, you know how they'll entice a person? Not necessarily with sin and vice and corruption. They can entice a person sometimes with beauty and things that will distract you. Sometimes, for example, a person who's a truly divine person, his challenge or her challenge will be something that's divine. They tell a story, for example, of Nochem Chernobyl, the great tzaddik. And once someone came to him and gave him a charity to be used for anything he needs, meaning for helping people, which he was known for. He gave him 10,000 ruble. This was a Russian coin, and that was a substantial amount in those times. Okay, he puts it in his drawer, and let's see how a little while later, a crying woman comes to him, says she's a widow, has one daughter to marry off, and she has no money to marry off, and that was a big embarrassment. She has a good chassan who they're talking about, but in those days it was necessary to pay for the expenses. Today it's also that way, but I mean to say then it was like a major thing that if you could not pay, you wouldn't get such a good chassan, a good groom. How much do you need? Reb Nachum says to her, I need 10,000 ruble. So he thought to himself, wow, that's divine providence. Someone just brought him that amount. And he was about to give it to her, but then a second thought came to his mind. And what was the second thought? That he didn't say this to her, but the second thought was, why give one person 10,000 rubles, such a large sum? He'll break it into parts and give the needy people 1,000 each, so 10 people will be helped instead of one. So he started debating in his mind what should he do. On the other hand, this woman had just come and she needs it. So he tells her, come back tomorrow. So he has to think about it. She returns tomorrow and he still hasn't resolved it. Because for every argument, one way, there's an argument the other way. They're both mitzvahs. The mitzvah to give 10,000 to her, the mitzvah to give break it into parts. He doesn't know what to do. Another day passes, another day, he keeps pushing her off. Then one morning he realizes that what's going on here? Bottom line is, the 10,000 rubles is still lying in his drawer. Nobody's getting it. He's busy debating the issue. He says both voices can be coming from the Yetzer Tov. They both can be right. Because if they're both right, then he's not going to end up doing anything. So one voice is definitely coming from the other side. But how do you figure out? How do you find out which is the healthy voice and which is the evil? Because they're both mitzvahs. And then he realized, what was his first thought? His first thought was to give it to her. When did the second big mitzvah maker in his voice come to him? Oh, you want to give away 10,000, make such a mitzvah? So he knew, that so-called Yetzer Hara knew that if I come and tell Rab Nachum Chernobyl, don't give the money to anyone, he's not going to listen to that. He's not going to take the money for himself. So what that voice found to say, I'll tell you what, do a better mitzvah. So sometimes the voice of the mitzvah is not necessarily a healthy voice, it's just a way of neutralizing the other voice. So he realized which voice came second, he knew that was the bad one. So he called her back, the widow, gave her the money, she married off her daughter. Maybe one of you are her grandchildren. Who knows? That part I don't know, the end of the story. But so it was a happy ending. This is an interesting way of looking at life, of in generally coming down to the practical side of things. And the practical side sometimes is as I said, the simple approach. So when we talk about, going back to the theme I was discussing, you talk about love, and where true love played itself out, it's not necessarily in the glamorous things in life. It's in the simple things in life. You know, with the healthiest forces that shape our lives, each of us sitting in this room, are events that happen before we remember them. Anything you remember, whether it's a birthday party, or it's a trip, or a gift you may have received, all beautiful things. Where you really were shaped were the early years of your formative years, and how your mother and father held you, and how they treated you, and how they validated or didn't validate you, whether they ignored you or they didn't ignore you. You'll never remember. The only thing you remember from that are the results, what kind of person you are today. It is those small details of how, as I said, a mother or father cradle, nurture, take care of a child when no one's watching, and when there are no video cameras, and there are no distractions. That's where, as Chassidus puts it, and Jewish mysticism says, Atzmus itself. And that's the highest name. If you never heard the expression, I'll explain it. When you hear Atzmus in language of mystics and Chassidim, it's the highest expression you can give for God. What does Atzmus mean? Atzmus means the essence. Why do we call it the essence? Because there's no other name to give it. As soon as you say any name, you're already defining it. So when you want to describe the essence of something, you just call it the etzem or Atzmus. Or in more detail, Atzmus umuhus. So the Baal Shem Tov says that the pshitus of a ish pashut, the simplicity of a simple person, touches the pshitus, the simplicity of Atzmus Ein Sof, the essence of God. You find this in the expression when Eliyahu the prophet, Elijah the prophet, comes to search for God. So it says that first he saw a wind, he heard a wind, and he realized that God is not in the wind. And then he saw a fire, a lightning, and God was not in the fire. And then Leberash, then he heard a thunder, and he saw that he was not in the thunder, in the song. And then suddenly, Koil Dmama Daka, there was a subtle, silent voice, a subtle, gentle voice. It's hard to translate. Dmama Daka. Dmama is like silent, but really subtle, and Daka is like gentle, very, very light. And then he realized that's where God is. So where is the essence that when you want to have the deepest experiences in life? Is it in the glamorous experiences you have, or in the simple moments? If you look at true love, the highest moments of love, of intimacy, you'll see it's not the glamour. Glamour may lead up to it. It may be surrounded by it. And it may be a lot of fire and thunder and winds, but it comes down to simple things that really can't really be defined. And the mystical explanation for this is because anything that is real is undefinable. When you say you don't have words to express that experience, and no words, you're really saying it's an essential experience, which is somewhat, you can say, a little paradoxical. If it's so essential, you should have so many words. You should write about it for ages. Why is it when it comes to speaking about superficial things like the weather, we have a weather channel, the 24-hour weather channel. If you listen to, tell me if it makes a difference in your life. If you see but people are fascinated by it. When they established the weather channel, no one knew it would take off. Who's interested in seeing the weather 24 hours? It's a very successful channel. We could analyze that too forever. Then you have sports radio. I'm not talking about the games themselves, which is another discussion. I'm talking about off-season, discussing around it, talk radio as they call it. You find people talk and talk and talk, and listen and listen. Who was it, the great visionary, the great paragon of our last century, Oscar Wilde, that said that people today speak more and more about less and less. Or maybe it was read more and more about less and less. Or another one of my favorites, I'm a chassid of Oscar Wilde, I guess. Not of everything. Some of his lines are good. Was that people think that modern times, what makes modern times unique is that today we have a lower rate of illiteracy. Whereas, let's say a few hundred years ago, many more people were illiterate. Today most people are literate. So he said, no, the difference between the past and the present is that today illiterate people know how to read. That's the way he put it. So we find when it comes to superficial things, this doesn't mean, by the way, I hope no one took that as an insult, it doesn't mean that everyone that reads is illiterate. It just means illiterate people know how to read, that's all. So you find superficial things in life you can talk about forever. Gossip, they said the weather, which is always great if you're in an elevator and you want to say something. You know, how's the weather? Did it start raining? Did it end raining? Is it going to rain? You know. And other things that, thank God, God gave us some called fillers to fill in awkward time and space. But when it comes to talk about real things, like yourself, and what really matters to you, and intimate details of your life, so it's true, today we have a thing called therapy, where people can talk and talk until their hour's up. But generally speaking, it's much harder to talk about the things that truly matter. So the question is asked, why? Things that are really close to you, you should have many words. And things that are superficial, you should have very few words. And the answer is because words are containers. Like this is a container, right? So, for the internet crowd, this is a container. And you can fill it up with water, but you can only fill it up as large as this container can contain. Beyond the container it'll spill out, spill over. So words are containers. They could only contain a certain amount of energy, a certain message. The intense feelings we have, the intimate feelings we have, are too powerful. It would be like too much for this small container. So what do? How do we expand the containers? So we create a language called metaphor. This can be poetry, music, art. I know some people hate poetry. Most kids hate poetry. They don't understand. I remember when I was a kid, I came to my father, I said, why can't you just say the way it is, straight? Why do you have to put it in some kind of twisted language? And even today some people wonder, but it doesn't pass, you can't really say, all brilliant people appreciate poetry. It's like the emperor with no clothes thing. But nevertheless, you could explain that poetry is a metaphor. That precisely if it's written in a very direct type of description, you can't contain as many ideas and feelings that you can contain in metaphorical language. So though it may not be quite as so-called tangible descriptions, but that's precisely that allows for much more imagination and many more feelings. Then there's a language that even metaphor, then there are energy and intensity that even metaphor cannot contain. That a song, which can express so much more than words, and art and romance that can express so much more than conventional language, that even they also become inadequate containers. And that's when we have only no recourse but to cry out. It could be just a cry. It could be an oy vey. One oy vey can carry more than entire volumes. Or it can be a laugh, just a sound. And then there's intensity and intimate feeling, as the Zohar puts, that's so profound that even a sound itself doesn't come out of us. It's so intense. It's called a kala de lo yishtama, a voice that has no sound. In the discussion of, for example, the analysis of the sounds of the shofar, these different versions, the reason the shofar has one long sound, one staccato sound, and one shorter sound, and then very, very, very quick staccato sound, is all a reflection and leading up to a voice that has no sound. So you think a voice that has no sound is the weakest voice of all. No, it's the loudest voice of all. It's so loud, it's so powerful, that there's no sound, there's no physical expression that can contain it. That's why you see, for instance, I don't want to use a negative example, but to just make the point, when people suffer major trauma, they can't even cry. The initial shock is so profound, is so shattering, then even a cry is not possible. When they cry is already considered to be a healthy thing happening. Of course, the same is possible on the positive side of joy. So essentially, in this interesting paradoxical way, the way the Kabbalists would put it is, the greater the light, the smaller the container. The greater the container, the smaller the light. Direct proportion. So containers themselves are limited, And you want to describe something that's fundamental, essential, you have to go to a place that's beyond expression. The deepest experiences every one of us have in life, everyone here, are things that are almost indescribable. You can try to find words, and because each of us have had indescribable things, so when you say to me, I had an indescribable experience, I can identify with it because I think of indescribable experiences in my life. But if I never had one, I would never understand what you're talking about. Just like a blind person can't describe colors to. So when people truly bond and connect on the deepest level, it's on that level that there are no words and no sounds. However, to get there, you need to have words, because no one's going to let you into their life, and they shouldn't, and you shouldn't let anyone into your life until you go through the preliminaries. So to go back to the story with Moses and Bezalel and the temple and Pikudei, the interesting thing is that though the vision of Moses is an all-encompassing one, but the bottom line is, what was the vision ultimately? The end in mind was that there'd be containers, that there'd be vessels, and that would be the expression of the divine. So you need to have a process, as we spoke earlier, a process that leads from one stage to the next, as Bezalel builds it. And the fact that the end of the matter is that even with the end in mind, those details of how you build it become part of the end as well, if you have the end in mind. In other words, what I'm saying is that the klal infuses the prat with so much power that the prat becomes part of the klal, because you could never have reached it without it. That's when they say that the journey is the destination. What does that mean? It doesn't mean literally the journey is the destination, because then you never reach anywhere. If you have a goal in mind, let's say it's love. You love another person in a true way, in a healthy way. Where is that love expressed? Is it only in the end? When love is made, or when love is achieved? Or all the details of your life become infused with love? The answer is the latter, obviously. So if you only have the details, and there's no real relationship, no love, so obviously love will not manifest. But when love is truly part of your life, and you understand its ultimate purpose, then all the details, even how you build the steps in the way, also become loving. You think when a mother or father loves a child in a healthy way, it's only when the child gives the parent nachas, like makes the parent smile. And when you have to clean the child, or bathe the child, or do things that may not be always so comfortable, you think there's less love there? You could say there's even more love, because it's something that is not so comfortable. When a mother stays up all night with a sick child, God forbid, is that more loving or less loving than when the child is giving the mother all the kvelling, nachas, and all the beauty that comes? Because love is not quantitative, it's not broken into parts. When you're running a business, so let's not talk, if it's your own business, it's another story, but if you're a hired gun, you don't really give a damn about the details. You want to make sure your boss is happy, and whatever it takes, and that's it. I lived up to my obligations. I gave you the product, the end product. The steps of the way, it doesn't really matter to you. I mean, if you're a true professional, it may matter, because you want to have you like to have pride, take pride in what you produced, etc., etc. But often it doesn't really matter. And our good old Marx, not Groucho, Karl, made it very clear in a very scathing attack on capitalism, that yes, that in a industrialized capitalistic system, people don't really care about the product that they're creating, because they don't benefit from the product. In an agricultural society, you worked on your own farm, so what you did with the toil of your hands was what you ate at night. So it's a whole different story. But today most people work in things that they have no direct benefit from, except the pay that they get. So there's a certain, what he calls, alienation between the worker and the product. But that's just as a tangent. When it's your own business, it's another story. Person's their own business, every little detail matters, because since it's yours, everything, from the detail to the big klal to the prat, all are part of that big picture. But when it comes to love, when you love someone, it's like your own thing. So the detail and the big are exactly the same thing. The little joys that you get that from what others may not even see as being very special can be more powerful than the things that everyone say, oh wow, look how beautiful. So even though we live in a somewhat of an age of, call it, of images, Like that joke they tell about the mother who's rolling her carriage. Someone comes over and looks at the newborn baby, say, "Wow, what a beautiful baby." And the mother says, "That's nothing. You should see the picture." You know? So you do have a world where it's like that reality is imitating images. Or like when 9/11, people were saying, "Wow, it's just like that movie or this movie." You know, reality like that. I think I told the story here. I was then on Friday after 9/11, MSNBC, I was so-called commentator for them that day with a few others. They invited me. It was a day of prayer, if you remember President Bush called a day of prayer. I hope I can mention his name in Manhattan here, but and not about him. And in the studio at the time was also a Mark McGuire. You know Mark McGuire? He's one of the spiritual leaders of our generation. Mark McGuire was home run king of the St. Louis Cardinals. Slugger, as they call it. Slugger? Yeah. And he was in the studio, not in a different room, but I heard his interview, and they asked him, so if you remember, the baseball season was suspended. It was like a big part of the news, because baseball seasons were not suspended that often. Even during World War II, they continued baseball because they said they kept up the morale, or whatever reason. But here it was suspended, if you recall, from for around a week. So they asked him, so when are we going to get back to real life and start playing baseball again? So this slugger says, more intelligent than the interviewer, says, I don't understand. You know, that's the problem. We think that baseball is real life. Like, when are we going to get back to real life? Real life is what we're seeing now. Baseball is an escape from real life. This was what he said. So, going back to the means and the end, what are more important? The Madison Avenue cynics like to say it's more important what people think happened than what happened, which is true. Perception. People perceive something more important for many than what actually happened. How would you feel that way? Let's say you did something really wrong, but everyone perceives you did a big mitzvah. Would you be happy with yourself? You don't have to answer. Think about it. So, in that context, to go back to the story here, so though vision is such a vital component, but the beauty of the Mishkan, of the temple, comes down that the same Moses, who had the great vision of the temple, never forgot the details. Because you could say, at the end of it, the temple was stood up. It fulfilled its purpose. The divine presence rested there, as the conclusion of this week's chapter. And Moses delivered the vision. So what does he have to give now? Go back to the details, how much gold, silver, copper. It's not like someone suspected him of taking it for his own personal gain. Even if someone has to give an accounting, why Moses? But Bezalel was the builder. He should give the accounting. He should say, here's how much gold I was given. Here's what I used it for. Why Moses, the man of God, a person took his time to start counting? He could have been teaching Torah, sharing visions. Not everybody was able to share a vision like Moses. Why does the Torah make the visionary the one that has to give the detailed accounting? Because in Jewish thought, and this is one of the most profound and I would say unique elements of Jewish mysticism, as to both all schools of mysticism, is that God is in the details. Even though that's a cliche, but the power of mitzvahs, or the way they put it is that in other schools of mystical thought, you achieve more through meditation and through so-called stripping ourselves from material details to reach the nirvana of the higher unity. This is a basic principle in almost all Far Eastern thought, whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism. In Judaism, no one has to teach us about divine unity. The whole Shema, the whole Judaism is built on Hashem Echad, that there's a higher unity. This is the whole point of, the fundamental principles of Jewish thought, is that there's one reality. But the interesting twist, and here's the uniqueness, that Judaism says to reach that unity you have to go through the details. Not avoid them, but enter into them. That in the smallest details you find the highest essence. Now you think it's counterintuitive, because you think the higher you go into the essence, the less the details should matter. You're going into the big vision, into the light. Why should you care about every little detail? Yet you see in the Torah the strange paradox that the meticulousness of the details of every mitzvah to the point of, I would even say, obsession. Seems very weird. I remember there was a guy that came to this class. He's no longer with us. He was just the first time he came to study Judaism in this class. It was years ago. He happened to work, if you remember him. He worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He was a guard. His shift began midnight. So he'd come to this class, and often he'd get a ride with someone, and they drop him off at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I remember because he came once and he said, "You know something? This class is destroying my life because I stand there at night with all these idols that are casting shadows, and he wants to feel like Abraham, that one day he wanted to shatter them all or something like that." I told him, "Relax, that's not the point of this class. Please don't do that. That wouldn't be such a wise thing to do." He was joking about it. But I remember he was a very smart guy. His name was Matt. And he was a sharp fellow. And we were studying about the spirituality of things. So he decided once, he came early to the class, and before my class at the time there was a Talmud class. So he sat in. Here was a bunch of Talmud scholars, all in their 70s or 80s, with long white beards. And they were discussing intricate details of a law called how you cut your nails. And he was sitting in. He completely didn't belong. First of all, he was younger, he didn't look like them. He didn't know Talmud, he didn't know Hebrew, Aramaic. But they're sitting and they're discussing, and he was like listening, and he was like very intrigued. And it was he described it afterwards. It was hilarious. So they said to him, he says, start talking. So how do you cut your nails? So one person was talking, you cut your nails. You have to cut this nail, then you skip, and then the next nail. And cutting nails is a whole procedure in Torah and halacha, and customs and so on. So he thought he was going to be funny. He says, "What happens if you bite your nails?" So someone says there's a tshuva about that somewhere. Somewhere someone talks about it. So he thought they were kidding. And then he goes on. He says, "I always thought you cut the first nail, the one closest to the nail clipper." Anyway, at some point they got annoyed with him, and he said to them, "Why are you studying these details? What is this thing?" He knows about the spirituality of Judaism. He says, "Are you all talking in code? Is this like a code of some deeper mystical secrets of life?" And they basically threw him out, obviously, because don't worry, he took it with a good sense of humor. And afterwards, he said to me, "What were they? Is this what the rabbis do? They talk about all these intricate details." I said, "That's nothing. You should go into a class when they learn the laws of Pesach or Shabbos. You'll really enjoy yourself." And it was interesting because it brought up a whole discussion. I remember everyone was saying, "It's true. You go to these Talmudic classes, so if you grew up with it, you're used to it. There's the details, such details, to the point of almost bizarre, because many of these details have just never happened in the first place. It's scenarios, the most bizarre scenarios, which is Talmudic detail." So first of all, I said, number one is, one second, you all have contracts in business, or mortgages. Read all the fine print there. It's just as obsessive. When you get to legalities, and you want to dot every I and cross every T, yes, there are a lot of details. Usually you don't look at the fine print, you rely on lawyers to do that. But you're not going to sign a contract unless your lawyer says that everything's been covered. And you cover the weirdest situations. Look at any insurance policy, because it has to cover every scenario. You never know what's going to happen. And if you don't cover one thing, as Mazel has it, that's what's going to happen. And so on and so forth. So in any legal document, the Talmud, no different, details are a major factor. But still doesn't answer the question, why would God really care about all those details? It's one thing human beings need to have transactions and legal arrangements. So the answer really comes down to, first of all, look at any computer program today. So computer program, zeros and ones, basic computer language, programming language. But all programs have basically, any program, even the simplest program, usually has thousands and thousands of characters. A little more complex can have millions of characters. Millions, billions of characters even. Take out one dot or add one dot to a computer program. What's going to happen? It's not a meaningless thing. The whole program can crash. You can lose data. In a worse scenario, take in the human body, the billions of cells we have. One small mutation, God forbid, can wreak havoc in the worst way possible. One extra chromosome. So when you really think about it today, it's not. It would be, once upon a time you could have said empirical observation and the way we looked at the universe in a very external way, the bigger the thing was, the more powerful it was. Today is the opposite. The smaller something is, the more powerful it is. What can wreak more havoc? Nuclear fusion or me breaking this table? This table is much larger than any subatomic particle. But subatomic particles, precisely because they're so powerful, that's why they're so small. Based on the formula I described earlier, that the greater the light, the smaller the containers. So power and energy is now not the domain of large things, it's the domain of the invisible, actually. No one can see subatomic particles, nor can you see DNA, nor can you see the chemicals in your body. Today, minute things, almost minuscule, microscopic things, have carry the power. So it's not a surprising thing that details matter. But above all, and this is the key, that the details, as I said earlier, capture the essence of the divine. Because to say that God is closer to heaven and closer to unity, so to speak, when you see dramatic expressions of beauty, to say God is closer to dramatic expressions of beauty than he is to simple details of life, is essentially saying that God is defined by your terms. It's a form of idol worship. That we see God when it's like very beautiful, when it's very dramatic, when it's very glamorous. That ultimately in Judaism, the ultimate paradox of the divine is experienced where the vision and the details all come together as one. And as paradoxical as it sounds, that's precisely why it's so powerful. Because remember, it's a paradox from our perspective. So when you say, is God to be found more in joy or in pain? So Moses had this dilemma. Why do you think God appeared in a burning bush to Moses? God appeared in a burning bush because God anticipated that Moses was going to ask the big question. If God had appeared, remember here God appearing the first time to Moses, you'd think he should have chosen a beautiful apple tree or some other nice tree. Why did he find a thorn bush, which is like the ugliest and the lowliest of all bushes? So the Medrash explains, because God anticipated the question Moses would ask. Are you coming to me to tell me that the Jews who are now suffering, and Pharaoh is bathing in the blood of Jewish children, you're telling me that they can be redeemed and you're going to redeem them? And you appear to me in beauty. It's very nice. I'm going to tell the people that we have a God of beauty. They're going to want to know, as I want to know, are you there with us in pain, or are you only there when in the good times? So God didn't have to wait for Moses to ask this question. Anticipating it, he appears in the thorn bush and says to him, through the message is, I am with you in your pain. And in mystical thought, in Jewish mysticism, there's deep discussions about what this means. Where is God in pain? Why is God allowing us to have pain? It's one thing, it'd be easier to understand that God decided to disappear or go off somewhere and ignore a painful situation. Then you could at least say that a good God could not bear to see it, so he, so to speak, turned his back, concealed himself. But to say that God is there and allowing it is a very philosophical problem. Would a father or a mother allow their child to suffer and stand and watch? It's one thing you could say they didn't know, but to say you're there and allowing it to happen? So this dilemma is the one that has plagued people from the beginning of time and still plagues us. What does that mean? How do you reconcile the divine omnipresence of a good God in the pain and suffering, senseless pain and suffering of people? We're not talking about pain, you can say, people brought upon themselves. It's cause and effect. There are things we've done that have hurt ourselves. We're talking about things that are where innocent children suffer, or others, as I said, senseless senseless experiences of pain that are hard to justify in any way. Not that any pain can be justifiable, but just to drive the point home. So this addresses a topic which is complicated to talk about here in short, but it does address the fact that the God's presence is obviously a lot different than we understand it. That God in some way does have this paradox, that he can be somewhere at the same time not affect the situation, which allows for free will, of course. How to explain that is not that easy, because how do you explain a God that's omnipresent and yet allowing things that are going against God's will? It's a contradiction. But this addresses the issue that I said earlier, that a human being can never fathom this mystery of God's existence. Moses got close to it. When Moses says, "Show me your face," and God says, "No one can see my face and live." This discussion, as I've elaborated many times in this class, is all about a God within pain. I want to understand you. I want to relate to you. And ultimately, God says, if you relate to me, if you understand me, you will be me. And if you're me, you won't have these questions. So to have an entity that's outside of God to understand God is the biggest paradox of all. Yet Moses still attempted, and it does come down to ultimately realizing that God does not exist on our terms. We exist on God's terms. So to try to have expectations and demands of God on our terms is really reversing reality. The part can never fully understand the whole. It's the whole that dictates what the part is like, not the other way around. So when God says to Job, who challenged God and said, "You are the good God. How do you allow such pain?" So God says to him, to paraphrase, God says, "And were you there when I created heaven and earth that you can ask me this question?" To explain, you ask me why there's suffering. Do you also ask me why there's joy? You ask me why there's death. Do you ask me why there's life? You ask me why there's an end, but you ask me why there's a beginning. We challenge God when things don't work. We never challenge God when things work. In other words, the mystery of life, the mystery of death is connected to the mystery of life. If we were never born, there would never be pain. So we challenge, once we're born, it's like a given, we should be happy. But the question really is, why were we born in the first place? When that'll bother you, God says to Job, as much as the pain you have, then we'll be able to talk. This was not a dismissive answer. This was not like pulling rank. It was simply understanding that all your questions are only possible because you exist. And you're not asking me why you exist. You're asking me, once I exist, why can't it be peaceful? Now don't get me wrong. In Judaism, nowhere does it say we have to lie down and just accept painful situations. In Judaism, you find absolutely challenging God. The whole concept of prayer is the chutzpah to be able to tell God, I want it a different way. But at the same time, it's also recognizing in the humility that we don't necessarily have the whole picture figured out. So I'm not here to give a simple answer to such a complex question. The only reason I touched upon it because it has a little overlap with this concept of Moses in this week's chapters where he challenges God, that the Moses of vision is the same Moses in the details. So in other words, Judaism is not just about big things, it's also about small things. As a matter of fact, in small things you probably find more bigness and greatness than in the bigger things. And that's why in its own, as I said, paradoxical way, the mitzvahs in the Torah, which is details, real details. If any of you may remember your grandmother's or great-grandmother's cleaning for Passover, which I can tell you was an obsession in my parents' home, my grandparents. And I don't mean that necessarily negatively, they did it with love. But I remember always wondering, be the skeptic that I was, and am, like, what is this thing looking for every stupid little crumb in every corner of every couch? And I mean, it's unbelievable. So this isn't just spring cleaning, even though I think spring cleaning was an outgrowth of Pesach cleaning. It was really to the unbelievable detail. Until this day, you see this. People who do that. And you say, like, what does God really care if there's a little crumb somewhere? And all these details. This is just an example in the Pesach. Because Passover is, of all the holidays, maybe the most detail-oriented. And I remember my uncles and my family, the way they had the Seder, and everything was precise and here and there. As I said, I was always a little troublemaker. I would always ask questions. And I still do. And ultimately, no one really gave me an answer. The only answer I ultimately found was actually in the computer programming analogy I just gave. That if it is connected to some divine system and a mystical system, then I could see it making sense. If it's just about a bunch of people trying to outdo each other in competitiveness of how crazy they can be, obviously doesn't make sense. And when you think about the majesty of nature, and you watch these nature shows, and you see the intricate details of how nature works, and the ecosystems, and the balance, and details do matter. Look how little creatures, how they protect themselves, how they care for their young. You see the March of the Penguins, popular film of how the mother and father protect that egg. It's a detail, small little detail, but every little thing matters. Then you realize that there's a little humility, that there is maybe a bigger picture. And in the bigger picture, small and large are not different. Shavu mashve katan gadol. And Moses demonstrates it in this chapter, that the great Moses, the man of such vision, was ultimately the one that gives the accounting of the details. So, on a personal note, what all this means? Huh?
You're over.
I'm way over. I'm over my quota? Okay. That the message... Yeah. Past my curfew. That the message really comes down to this, each of us tonight will go back to our corner. So some people on the cyberspace, it's not night anymore. So each of us will go back to our little world. And our lives have a lot of details. Say, what is that? Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. And at times we want to escape from all those little details of our lives. We plan a vacation, you get excited, but then the vacation has a lot of details in the planning, so that's another thing. And we find major events in our lives, milestones, or big things that make it all seem to make it all worth it. But ultimately, it's very difficult to escape the details of our lives. So if we were able to escape to a mountain and find peace in a higher place, well, if someone can do that, by all means, why don't you try it? But ultimately, most people can't, and even those that could, it's only for a while. And ultimately, what does it really mean? It means that you can find God on the mountain, but you can't find God in the valley. Can you live your life in New York City, a city that is obsessed with details as any city, more than any city, with so many people, with so many options, so much life and energy, so many distractions? Can you live in a world like that and find deep spiritual inner peace? Most people will say no, they can't. They may be addicted to New York energy and just can't leave. Some people do leave and say they found peace when they go to a more of a rural Midwestern city. Some people escape to the plasticity of Los Angeles, which has its own things. And ultimately, the fact of the matter is that this dilemma is one that has plagued thinkers and philosophers. You find, especially in the classical philosophers, like the Greek philosophers and others, you find that they needed respite, they needed environments. It was called academies, or it was the mountains, or the mythologies, where they escaped to be able to find deeper truths. You rarely will find anyone that discovered a high level of spirituality in the Wall Street of life. You don't find it. Even the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, chose to be shepherds. The reason was quite intentional, because a shepherd is not in a competitive situation in most cases. Sheep are docile creatures who graze in the meadows while you can meditate and pray and connect to your God, and which is what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did. Who was the first businessman? Who was the first accountant, Jewish accountant? Was Joseph. Mara de Chushbon, Targum says. He was an accountant, an actual accountant, by the way. And then later he became the viceroy of Egypt, where he dealt in the grain, traded in grain, and turned Egypt into a great superpower because of his ideas and his way of hoarding the grain and stockpiling it and then selling it. And the great achievement of Joseph is when Jacob reunites with him after 22 years later, that they were separate, and he thought he was dead. That Joseph remembers Eglah Aruf, he remembers the Pasha, the chapter that they had studied together. A detailed Torah chapter that is probably relevant in the time of Joseph, not necessarily in practical situation. So there are discussions why that chapter, but that's not for now. And then he realized that Joseph was greater than all the patriarchs, because they separated themselves. They lived ascetic lifestyles. As a shepherd in a field, it's not that difficult, relatively, to connect to the divine in nature. But to live in Erves Haaretz, in a corrupt land, in a decadent land, with in a business world, and trading, and all that comes with that, and the greed, and the rules of the marketplace, not that simple to maintain spiritual integrity, for even the greatest people. But ultimately that is the lesson, that in the details of life you can find the highest levels of God, the highest levels of the essence. And it's somewhat more than somewhat consoling to remember that it's not about you just discovering the vision and mission of your life. That obviously is a critical component for us to look for that mission. But even more importantly, to know that you don't have to escape the details of your life to reach there. That it does come down in small acts of kindness. It does come down to small things that maybe nobody notices, in how you make a gesture to another person, you reaching out, a kind word. These things are not small matters, even though they may not get dramatic points, as in like changing the world in a moment. But they have, on the scale of atzmos, of the essence of things, they're like the dot in a computer program that may have billions of characters. But that dot is as critical as any other dot. Like I always point out with musical notes in a large composition, it's not how large the note is, how loud it is. That musical note, when it comes its turn to play that note, everything else is dependent on it. And you take out that note, the whole composition is affected. The fact that you may not notice it or someone may miss it, that's just because we're our limitation. But anything in life, those components, when it comes your turn, your time, your moment, and your space, that's indispensable. Which ultimately means that even though there's 6 billion people on this planet, Pikudei HaMishkan, every detail counts, and your role is indispensable. Nobody of the 6 billion can replace you. You may not feel that way, but the truth is no one's asking you. God put you here whether you like it or not, and chose you in that context. So when Mozart was asked by the great Archduke, who thought he was a connoisseur of music, Mozart, beautiful music, but far too many notes. You hear? He said there were too many notes for his taste. So Mozart responded, at least purportedly responded, yes, but not one more than necessary. And this is true in any act of creation and any beautiful thing. The person who's created, the architect, the person who has the vision, knows how each detail is so vital to the big picture. So it comes down to our lives. It's somewhat of I think it's uplifting to know that it's not just a big event that has to happen in your life that's going to be your redemption. It's actually a small event that will probably be the redemption. So it's true that many people in this room may need a blessing to find your soulmate. So that's a big event. Or to find a healthy job. Or to find your mission in life. No doubt that those are vital, and most vital of all, because that's where it all begins and it ends. But remember, sometimes it's a detail that you do that leads you there. And it's when your details can be aligned with somewhat vision, then you're beginning to get there. So if I would say this, so someone asked me, so where do you begin? I don't know if you have to begin with getting the big vision. You may not get there overnight. You have to begin with finding some details in your life that have some vision in them. It's like when you untangle a ball of yarn that's very tangled up, psychologically. You don't begin with untangling the hardest knots, the most difficult knots. What you do is you find edges on the tangent, on the periphery, that are easier to untangle, knots that are not so tied up. You go through the back door, you find things that are easier to tackle. And interestingly, when you untangle that, it gets easier to untangle the harder knots. So it's finding those little details in your life that's easier for you to find some meaning in them. And this can be your job, sometimes the work you do, using it for a good cause, volunteering for something, using your unique experience or knowledge in an area that you don't necessarily selfishly benefit from. It can be areas of charity, financial, monetary charity. It can be anything that's a gesture, an act that works for you. But infusing it with some higher purpose, so it may be a small thing, but that small thing is connected to the higher purpose. So what happens is, when you do it, action creates a reaction, and that reaction begins to affect other details. It spills over. So we call mitzvah gereres mitzvah. It says you do one mitzvah, it drags another with it. You don't have to do them all in one shot. There's no mitzvah to do that. That doesn't work that way. Then the whole statement makes no sense. If mitzvah gereres mitzvah and you're doing them all, why would you say one mitzvah brings another? Because it's like a contagious thing. It's like a virus used to be negative, but today they say the viral effect can be positive on the internet or something. So there are healthy viruses, like in yogurt and yeast and other stuff like that. So on a positive thing, it means that positivity breeds positivity. You bring some positivity in one corner of your life, it spills over to other corners. That's how it is. That's the way it works. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a cold turkey transformation. As a matter of fact, I usually say to people, I don't trust such transformations. Anyone I see getting spiritually inspired and moving too fast, I always am very wary of it, because it seems to me that it's not necessarily your pace. There may be other pressures on you. It may be that you get so carried away, you've seen a light, you want to right away embrace it all. It's healthier. I'd rather see someone take more time to integrate it and own it than to quickly achieve a lot. Because it's not about cramming and it's not about grabbing the moment. Obviously what works, and you try, but it's critical to make it yours. And that usually takes time and some pacing. So go at your own pace. I know it may sound strange to me, but a lot of people tell me they're spiritually inspired. I usually am a little, I don't want to say sarcastic, but I like to say, take it easy, relax. They say, I don't want to, that's not what I was expecting to hear from you. From you, I would have wanted to hear that that's great, and let's go to Israel, and go for Shabbos, and do this, and do that, and wear tzitzis, and stick mezuzahs all over, mezuzah kissing, and I'm not dismissing any of that, but you have to own it, you have to make it yours, and it should be integrated. And I'm not here to tell anybody how fast to go, not fast to go, but vital that it should be your thing, individually yours, not due to peer pressure, or rabbinic pressure, or communal pressure, or synagogue pressures, or other stuff. And sometimes it's good to take it with a grain of salt. A little lightness of spirit is always healthy. A little sense of humor, if not to laugh at yourself a little too. But remembering that the details, it is a detail that will make the difference. Remember, every big shift always begins with a small detail. I don't know if any of you were ever up north. I think it's in northern Minnesota, where there's a literally, that you can literally with your fingers measure it, a little place where there's a little creek of a little water that originates there from some lake. And that little creek becomes ultimately the great Mississippi River. So if you were to block it right there and just stand there for a long time, I mean, obviously pressure would build, but you basically could dry up the Mississippi. Don't try it out to make headlines or something, but the point is that sometimes you see big things and very big things, and you have to realize where their beginnings are much humbler than we think. And the same way the other way around. Sometimes major shifts begin with a small twist, a small little matter. So, with that being said, honor and celebrate the details of your life, but not as an end in itself. Infuse them with something klal, the bigger picture. So the Pikudei, the details of the accountability of a detail, but it's Pikudei HaMishkan. It's not just a detail. As I said in the beginning of this evening, that details can also consume us. The point here is not to be consumed. The point is to elevate them. They should become Elu Pikudei HaMishkan. That these are details of a temple that you're building. So which practically means you go home tonight, look at your house, look at your room that you sleep in, your bedroom or your dining room or living room, or today your studio that is all in one. And I'm sure you can find one corner of a shelf or a desk and think about maybe putting something there that may be a spiritual reminder. It could be a charity box, it could be a holy book, a siddur, a chumash. It's a detail. But these details make a major difference. Korach was the one that challenged Moses and said to him in a cynical voice, said, we wear tzitzis. A tzitzit in those days had blue tchelis, had one blue string. So he said, what about a talis shetchula tchelis? A talis that's completely blue. You're going to stump Moses. A talis is completely blue. does it still need a tzitza, a blue string? So of course the logic would go, if the whole talus is blue, why would you need a blue string, one detail? And the answer is that yes, you need a string, you need a detail. And then he said, what about a bayis moles forum, a house that's filled with books? Does it need a mezuzah? And Moses says yes. So he laughed at that too. He says a mezuzah is just a few chapters in one book of the Torah. I have a house full of books. Why would it be significant? That's the difference. Moses understood, not that Moses didn't appreciate the big picture, but Moses understood the big picture and the small picture got to come together. And if they don't, you have a Korach. You have a very wise guy who has a lot of arguments, but not necessarily has the big picture and the small picture in mind. And Moses was providing a blueprint for life, not just how to have big visions, how to build a house full of books, which is great, but also how to have one doorpost that has something that reminds you of God. And the same thing is in our lives. So celebrate your details, elevate them, Ela Pikudei HaMishkan. And it all comes together, the klal, the prat, the klal, the vision, the details, and then they're elevated back into the vision, to the big light. And with that being said, I want to wish everyone a very good week in the details of your week and in the bigger elements of the week. The 6 days are like details, Shabbos is like the klal, and they are interconnected, and you need both. You have only one Shabbos in the week, but 6 times that in the weekday. So the details are more important than the Shabbos in a certain way. We have much more of it. And until next Wednesday, I also want to say happy birthday to Esther Basha Bat Asya, our good friend Mark's Belinsky's sister, 19th of Adar. And blessings to every birthday, and blessings on all levels of elevating our details into the big picture. Those of you who knew the big picture of finding the shidduch, as I said, may we celebrate at your wedding, and please invite me. I have my dancing shoes ready, as just married with my own daughter, so it makes it easier. And we should celebrate together many big occasions and small occasions. Everyone have a very good night, and to you in the cyberspace, I bid you farewell as well, till next Wednesday. I know that this week, by the way, it will be archived, so you'll be able to see this again. If you want to see a replay, there'll be a, what do they call, encore. Yeah. Okay, so good night, everyone.
Thank you.